Over the years I've taught guitar, I have helped many students learn the fretboard with a simple and effective strategy that will have them familiar with the notes on the fretboard in a minimum of 25 days. For some students, it does take a little longer, but the point is to master the notes, not try and get through the exercises as quickly as possible. Remember, you're not competing with anybody. You're doing this to enhance your own personal enjoyment on the guitar. In this video, I'm going to explain why it's important that we know the notes on the fretboard. I'm going to give you the simple and effective strategy that I've used with students for years, and I'm going to let you know about some of the popular approaches that a lot of guitar players use, but that you actually want to avoid. And if you like the ideas that I'm talking about in this video, you might enjoy the fretboard memorization course over at guitarnutrition.com. You absolutely do not need this course in order to master the notes on the fretboard, but sometimes having step-by-step instruction and daily practice routines can help you stay committed to the process. I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. Not knowing the notes on the fretboard is like watching a movie in black and white. You can see what's going on, but seeing it in color unlocks a whole nother dimension of understanding. Maybe you've seen people online talking about why you don't need to know the notes on the fretboard. These people will talk about how you can do everything with shapes and scale degrees. Now, you can actually do that, but it's like watching a movie in black and white. These people aren't recommending that you use shapes and scale degrees because it's actually any easier. They're only telling you to do this because they don't know the notes on the fretboard themselves. They might have tried to learn it in the past, but they've never gotten to the point where they're actually fluent with the notes on the fretboard. They've only ever been able to recognize the notes by working them out. Now, you absolutely don't need to know the notes on the fretboard in order to enjoy playing the guitar, but no one who actually knows the notes on the fretboard is going to recommend that you don't learn them. If you have any interest in understanding the notes on the fretboard, the level of freedom that you get from knowing the notes on the fretboard makes everything you do on the guitar so much easier. And that means you're able to have so much more fun. It's kind of hard to articulate the experience of knowing the notes on the fretboard until you've done it, but here's an example that might help you understand what it's like. Have a look around your room. You can see every color, but you're also not naming the colors in real time. However, you know what they are, so you are able to name any of them without any hesitation if required. This is what it's like to be fluent with the notes on the fretboard. We're not actively thinking about every single note as we are playing it. We're often playing too fast for that. However, when we're fluent, we are able to name every note on the fretboard as required in real time without thinking about it. No hesitation. Just like when you look around a room and are able to name the colors. When you name colors, you don't have to figure them out. You just know what they are. You're not looking at the color you're trying to recognize and thinking, okay, I don't think it's black. It's not white. Is it a primary color? Like, there's no process to figure out what color you're looking at. You have learned that color is that color. Like you don't figure it out, you just know what it is. This is kind of different to how we learn the alphabet, for example. The alphabet is a sequence, and we never really use it outside of the sequence. Obviously, we use it to make words, but in alphabetical order, we don't really ever use it outside of the sequence. It's hard to recite backwards. You probably couldn't recite it with every third letter, for example. And if I asked you something like, what letter comes before Q? You've probably started singing the alphabet song in your head. And so because the notes on the fretboard of the musical alphabet actually use letters, we often tend to subconsciously adopt the approach of the alphabet to how we learn the notes on the fretboard. We try and do them in a sequence. However, we don't want to do that. We want to learn the notes on the fretboard the same way that we learned our colors. We want to see them and just know. Now, knowing the notes on the fretboard is not a substitute for understanding our scale degrees. We actually want to be able to do both. Knowing your notes on the fretboard will allow you to do things like superimpose this E minor triad over a C, while being aware of the scale degrees as they relate to both the E minor chord and the newly formed C major 7 chord. At the same time, by the way. It'll make learning riffs and chords way more effective, as you'll have another data point to associate with what you're doing. And it will prevent you from playing wrong notes. which will make learning scales and chords a whole lot more effective. To understand why that works, I want you to think about a piano for a second. The piano is an instrument with very obvious white and black notes. If you're playing in the key of C on a piano, you should be playing the white notes. You're not going to be touching any of the black ones. That's really obvious. You know if you're playing a wrong note and you're in the key of C, because you'll be touching a black one. Now, the frets on the guitar are obviously a bit different. They don't have colors. They all look the same. However, if we have taken the time to learn the fretboard fluently, and if we can recognize the notes on the fretboard in real time, like we talked about, this means when we're learning a new scale or a chord with some obscure fingering, we aren't relying on our ability to remember some random shape or sequence. We look at the fretboard and we're able to quickly and intentionally target the notes that we actually want. And as we do this, we're integrating our physical and our intellectual understanding, which will help us have a better grasp of the concept overall. Let's just say we were learning a C major scale. If I know the notes on the fretboard and I'm a little unsure of my shape and I'm playing and I'm thinking, how does it go again? I'm like, is it this one? If I'm unsure, I look down, I'm like, oh, no, that's a B flat. I know there's no B flat in the key of C. There's no accidentals. So I'm like, B, must be that one. Being able to recognize those notes on the fretboard in real time allows you to more intentionally target the notes and the chords, and you can see what you're doing. You'll learn the shapes better. It's a good time. When we do decide we want to learn the notes on the fretboard, it can be really tempting to use hacks. A lot of guitar players use these to try and speed up the process. But what might shave a couple of weeks off your initial learning of the notes on the fretboard will actually cause you a ton of pain in the long run. I was guilty of this myself. When I was first learning the notes on the fretboard as a young guitar player, I learned them on the E and the A string, and then I used this octave pattern to relate the notes in the E string to the D string. And that's how I figured out the notes in the D string. Here is why that is a terrible idea. If you learn the notes with the octave pattern, your brain will rely on that sequence to identify them. You'll get really quick at moving through that pattern, but you'll still be moving through that pattern. That takes mental effort and that takes time. If you use this octave pattern to learn that this note here is an A, whenever you look at that note, you will mentally be thinking about the octave pattern and relating it back to that one there. That's a step you don't need. You learned that this one was just an A when we first learned the E string, so why can't we just learn that that one's an A? Then we don't have all of that extra work having to go through that note there. And when we're trying to do stuff in real time with no latency, it's a problem if our brain has to go through extra steps. It took me a long time to retrain my brain to not go through that sequence to try and get that note, and to just recognize that as being an A because it's there on the D string. Don't put yourself through that. Take slightly longer initially and learn each note for what it is. The ironic thing about this is that later on, the octave pattern and every other interval for that matter become extremely useful tools that allow us to strengthen our knowledge of the notes on the fretboard. However, the distinction is that we're using it to strengthen our knowledge in a very musical way. We're not using it to establish our knowledge in the first place. All right, this is the process that we want to use to learn the notes on the fretboard. We're going to start with 3 notes on the low E string, E, F, and G. You're going to randomly call out one of these notes and play it after you've called it out. Now, the key distinction here is that you have to play it after you've called it out. So we want E, G, F. We don't want G, F, E. We don't want that. We want to play it after we have called it out. You want to do this for 60 seconds. Just like this. G, F, E, F, G, F, G, E. Now, obviously, you've only got 3 notes. There's only going to be so much variation in terms of how random they are when you call them out, but that's okay. On day 2, check that you can play those first 3 notes with 0 hesitation. When I say 0 hesitation, I mean how I was doing it before. G, F, G, E, 0 hesitation. If there is any hesitation, as in maybe it sounds like this, G, that's too long, too much hesitation. Go back over those 3 notes for 60 seconds again. But if there is no hesitation, then you can add another note. Add the A. Now you repeat the same process, 60 seconds, calling notes out randomly, but for these 4 notes. Something like this. G, A, E, F, A, G, A, F, E, G. Just like that. You want to repeat this process each day, only adding a new note if you can do the previous day's notes with 0 hesitation. The reason this works so well is you're only adding one piece of new information each day. Let's just say on day 3, you can do these first 4 notes with 0 hesitation because you know them really well now. All you're doing is learning that that is B. You're just adding one more tiny piece of information and continuing to strengthen your knowledge of the 4 that you already know. Once we've done it with the low E string, you do the same thing with the A string. A, B, C. We start with the first 3 notes and add one more every day until we've learned the whole A string. Then we do it with the D string. We do it with each string independently. If we do this and add one new note every day, it'll take 25 days to master the fretboard with 0 hesitation, so you know them like that. But if it takes a little longer, it's all good. It is extremely important that you trust the process. This strategy for learning the notes on the fretboard will work extremely effectively if you make sure there is no hesitation in your recognition of the previous day's notes before adding the new note. Remember, you're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're doing this for you. It's about learning the notes, not getting through the exercise. Do it carefully. Do it right. One of the annoying things about learning the notes on the fretboard is the fact that every fret looks the same, right? Well, actually, no, every fret does not look the same. The guitar has these fret markers laid out in specific places, and obviously each string is in a different place. You want to use this to your advantage when you're learning the notes on the fretboard. Make a point of noticing where each note is exactly. For example, if I'm learning the A on the low E string, I'll notice that, this is in a fret with a dot. The second dot, or the third dot, depending on your guitar. I'm also making a point of noticing that it's in the middle of the fretboard, generally, and that it's on the low E string. That's one of the strings on the edge. It may seem like I'm stating the obvious here, but making a point to notice all of these specific data points just adds extra information that makes it easier to remember that note. Or if I'm doing the F on the A string, this is the 8th fret. I might look at it and notice, this is the empty fret, no dot, empty fret, and right next to this one with a dot. That's the 7th fret. And I might notice it's a little further up the neck than the 5th fret. It's also on the A string, which is not one of the middle strings, but it's also not right at the edge. Notice everything you can. The more data points you can connect with each note, the easier it'll be to find in your memory. This is an example of how we might engage our intellectual understanding as we're learning the notes on the fretboard. So once you've learned the notes on the fretboard with 0 hesitation, you want to continue to strengthen your knowledge in a musical way. While learning the notes randomly, like we've done, is the best way to learn them, we also want to practice building familiarity with some other exercises. Due to the way our physical understanding works and how we develop muscle memory, we can still end up being reliant on the process of recognizing notes along a single string. So here are some examples of a few exercises we can use to break out of that and continue to strengthen our knowledge of the notes on the fretboard in a musical way. The first thing we might try is recognizing notes on the fretboard horizontally and vertically. So for that, we're going to pick one note. I'm going to use C. If we're finding the notes horizontally, what we want to do is recognize the notes as they move along this way. So we'd go C, 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 C. I'm identifying the notes on each string as we move along horizontally. We might also do that vertically. If I'm doing it vertically, that means I'd go C, 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 C. Another really great one we can do is identifying the notes in chord shapes. We can do this with literally any chord shape, but if you haven't done it before, I'd recommend starting with your open chords or your bar chords. We might take the C major chord. C, E, G, C, E. When you do this, you'll actually start to notice some interesting things about the architecture of these chords. We've got one C, another C, only one G, but 2 E's. Now if I played it with the finger, when you're identifying notes on the fretboard, you want to make a point of identifying the scale degrees as well. This will help you start to develop your understanding of the interval relationships between chords. So for example, let's say we're using a C major bar chord, which has the notes C, G, C, E, G, and C. And the scale degrees 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. So then we might do this C bar chord. C, G, C, E. And then G if we're playing that one. And that's got the scale degrees 1, 5, 1, 3. Now that's the same as here. 1, 5, 1, 3. These two shapes look kind of different, but if we're able to recognize the notes in the scale degrees, what we realize is that they are exactly the same. At the start of the lesson, we said we do not want to use the octave shape as a means of figuring out the notes on the fretboard. However, after we have these notes down, the octave interval, and every other interval actually, become fantastic tools for improving our recognition of the notes on the fretboard. When we recognize the notes on the fretboard in the context of an interval, we're also familiarizing ourselves with scale degrees and interval relationships across the guitar. And music is made up of intervals. Harmonic intervals form chords, and melodic intervals form melodies. The more effectively we're able to understand and recognize these intervals, the more effectively we'll be able to do everything on the instrument. One really good way to practice intervals is to take a scale, like a C major scale, and to grab an interval from that, in this case a sixth, and recognize C and A. Notice the shape that you're playing. Notice the scale degrees. Notice the notes on the fretboard. Or this one here, C and G. Notice the shape. Notice the scale degrees. Notice the notes on the fretboard. And we can do this with multiple shapes of the major scale, multiple positions. What we want to do is get familiar with the intervals. Like this interval here, for example, is also a fifth, even though it looks really awkward and seems to be nothing like that one. Knowing the notes, knowing the interval scale degrees helps us improve. These are by no means the only exercises that we can do to improve our recognition of the notes on the fretboard. So if you have any other really great ideas or ways that you've done it, let me know in the comments. All right, so if you carefully follow the strategy that I've outlined in this video and practice every day, you'll have mastered the notes on the fretboard in about 1 to 3 months. And if you're thinking about learning the notes on the fretboard, then you probably want to enjoy playing guitar for the rest of your life. And in light of that, a few months is nothing to develop a skill that is literally going to enhance every aspect of your guitar playing. If you feel like you don't have the knowledge or the motivation to do this on your own, check out the course that I've put together to help you stay on track. The Musician's Guide to Fretboard Memorization is designed to take you through the entire process of memorizing the notes on the fretboard in the most effective and the most musical way possible. After going through the course, you'll probably find your general musicianship and chord knowledge have also improved in addition to having mastered the notes on the fretboard. We always want to make sure we are maximizing the effectiveness of our practice. And making sure that our exercises that we practice hit multiple things is a really great way of doing this. So the course is divided into 3 sections. We'll start off by going over the why we actually want to learn the notes on the fretboard. How is it going to help our playing? How do we want to approach it in order to make the process as effective as possible? The second section will take you through 25 days of practice tracks. These will allow you to learn the notes on the fretboard randomly, like we talked about in this video, and it won't take any more than 10 minutes per day. In the third section, we'll go over a number of different exercises that we can use to strengthen our knowledge of the notes on the fretboard in a musical way. The cool thing about these exercises is that they're more than some tools to just help you improve your ability to recognize notes. You'll find that they exemplify an approach to developing awareness of what you're doing on the guitar. If you think of it this way, you'll find that literally everything you do starts to become a tool to strengthen your knowledge of the guitar fretboard and how music works. If you want to get a hold of the Musician's Guide to Fretboard Memorization, head along to guitarnutrition.com via the link in the description. If you want to try it for free, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow Guitar Nutrition on Instagram, and send me a DM telling me why you want to check out the course. I'm trying to grow our reach on both of these platforms, so every subscribe and every follow helps a lot. But thanks for checking out the video. Give it a like and leave a comment letting me know how you've gotten on learning the notes on the fretboard. I'll see you next time.